Step out of the line. This area is designated strictly for confirmed VIPs, not maintenance staff pretending they belong to the higher echelon. The words, crisp and edged with institutional disdain, sliced through the low, anticipatory murmur of the expo floor well before anyone had the chance to pinpoint the source. Heads swiveled, a scattering of confused attendees and media snapping their attention toward the velvet-roped lane, half expecting a celebrity meltdown or a security breach. Instead, they focused on a solitary, quiet man whose work jacket was frayed at the cuffs, holding tightly to his young daughter's hand, struggling to blink back the hot sting of public, undeserved humiliation. This is not a misunderstanding, the coordinator, a severe woman named Marissa, added, her voice sharper now, carrying across the polished tile. People like you absolutely do not belong in this section. But she had no capacity to perceive the seismic event that was already building, hidden from view. No one did, because the very crisis that would soon shake the structural integrity of the entire hall was silently gathering on the opposite side of the exhibit floor. And the man she had just contemptuously pushed aside was, improbably, the only person currently in the building who possessed the expertise to neutralize it. Soon, the presence of the world-famous keynote speaker, Commander Hale Strickland, would completely dismantle the existing hierarchy in this room the very instant he crossed the threshold. But before I show you the exact, indelible moment the real VIP bowed his head, you need to hear how this extraordinary day truly began. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. This isn't just a story about where one stands physically in a line. It is a profound observation about what people fundamentally misjudge when they perceive a uniform, or the absence of one. He did not react the way any spectator, including Marissa, could have possibly expected. Instead of arguing back, instead of meeting the overt hostility with his own righteous outrage, he simply shifted his body, stepping deliberately behind his daughter, shielding her small frame from the sudden, sharp waves of curious and judging stares. His profound quietness unsettled the observers far more deeply than any verbal outburst could have. He wasn't confused by the accusation. He wasn't timid or weak. He was electing for calm because chaos was, sadly, intimately familiar to him. Years spent navigating intense, volatile crises had trained him precisely how to stand absolutely still when everyone else around him was spiraling out of control. He lifted his daughter easily onto his hip, murmuring something soft and grounding to reassure her, and then walked them both, steadily and without haste, out of the glare of the spotlight, as though he had been fully prepared for this precise moment of humiliation long before it ever occurred. The girl clung instinctually to his jacket, her small fingers curling into the faded stitching where his old, official Air Force patch used to be affixed, a symbol now merely of a forgotten past. The vast, echoing expo floor felt perceptibly colder following the confrontation, and the powerful display lights glinting off the polished surface of the nearby aircraft prototype seemed to sharpen the glaring wrongness of the moment. He inhaled deeply, drawing stability into his core the way he had practiced countless times in his life, one hand resting lightly on the back of his daughter's head, his thumb tracing slow, comforting circles. He had made an unbreakable promise to himself that she would never witness the devastating, self-destructive anger that used to govern him, long before he had become a father. He located an empty, obscure bench near a lengthy row of intricate scale engines, far removed from the surging crowd and the cordoned VIP lane, and set her down with extreme care. She swung her short legs gently, then cast a backward, lingering glance toward the velvet-roped line. Her voice came out much smaller, thinner, than it should have for an 8-year-old girl who truly adored the limitless skies. Baba, why did she talk like that? His throat suddenly tightened, dry and constricted. He desperately didn't want the world's casual, cutting cruelty to become integrated into her nascent language. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Because some people don't know what they're actually looking at, he said, his tone gentle, steady. But that's their mistake, not ours. It certainly wasn't the first time he'd delivered those exact words. But today, perhaps for the first time, he recognized a new, unsettling question in her searching eyes, the silent query that asked whether he was deliberately hiding something far deeper and more complex than he allowed her to see. He shifted uncomfortably on the bench, letting his gaze intentionally drift toward the massive prototype engine on prominent display nearby. A faint, almost musical metallic tremor subtly hummed beneath its sleek casing. Most attendees walked past the leviathan of metal without registering the anomaly. His daughter, completely absorbed, didn't hear the sound at all, but he heard it with unnerving clarity. He always heard these kinds of things. Something was profoundly wrong. The underlying hum lacked a true rhythm. The cycle was impure, dirty. Someone, he realized with a spike of dread, had erroneously bypassed a critical safety lockout. And if the engine demonstration were allowed to begin in this compromised state, the high-pressure ignition chamber would suffer a catastrophic glitch right in front of the highly anticipated live audience. He exhaled slowly through his nose. The very last thing he desired was to step back into a world he had painstakingly walked away from years ago. But that was the defining problem with truly buried expertise. A true crisis always possesses a relentless way of digging it back up. A small, frantic staff team suddenly hurried by, whispering in agitated tones. One technician gripped a tablet displaying sharp, flashing red warnings. Another kept anxiously checking the main entrance where the keynote VIP, Commander Strickland, was now expected at any minute. Panic was swelling palpably within their hurried, uncoordinated movements. His daughter watched them run past. "Is something happening?" "Maybe," he said quietly. A deep, familiar ache formed almost instantly in his chest. The old, powerful instinct to protect and intercede was rising fast, surging faster than he ever wanted it to. Being completely unseen didn't bother him. Being publicly dismissed certainly didn't bother him, not anymore. But imminent danger, that was an entirely different and non-negotiable trigger. He stood slowly, his eyes now locked onto the sleek, silver engine housing. Its distorted pulse was telling an intricate, terrible story that only someone with his highly specific background could fully comprehend. And despite every effort he had made to leave his old life completely behind, one simple truth pushed past all the rest of his reservations. He had the distinct and specific skill set to fix this unfolding disaster before it became a public spectacle. Therefore, he had the undeniable moral responsibility. And soon, every single person in this building, including the coordinator who had haughtily shoved him aside just minutes ago, would realize precisely who they were truly dealing with. The inevitable transition had begun. The first fault line in the reversal of fortune had visibly cracked open. As he gently took his daughter's hand and stepped purposefully toward the malfunctioning display, the hall-wide announcer's voice boomed suddenly overhead. "Commander Hale Strickland has entered the building." A powerful ripple of electric excitement rushed immediately through the expo floor. People surged instinctually toward the entrance. Cameras were abruptly lifted. Security personnel moved in to tighten the perimeter. But the quiet man, walking resolutely in the exact opposite direction, toward the burgeoning crisis instead of the anticipated spectacle, was the only person who truly understood the gravity of what needed to happen next. He didn't move like a generic maintenance worker anymore. He moved with the honed efficiency and focus of the chief engineer who had once saved a flight crew at 40,000 feet. He moved with cold, measured purpose now, expertly guiding his daughter through the suddenly thinning crowd as the booming announcement echoed dramatically behind them. The momentum of the entire expo floor shifted dramatically toward the entrance where the commander had arrived, but he headed straight for the humming engine that absolutely should not have been humming at all. His daughter kept perfect pace beside him, her small, quick footsteps matching his renewed, determined stride. When they reached the demonstration area, the cluster of staff he'd noticed earlier was huddled anxiously around a complex control panel, arguing in hurried, strained whispers. One junior technician kept jabbing agitatedly at the screen, insisting stubbornly that the system was merely recalibrating itself. Another tech looked utterly pale, his eyes darting toward the distant VIP escort rapidly approaching. A dangerous sheen of panic was rising with every tick of the clock. He squeezed his daughter's hand gently but firmly. "Stay close," he murmured, then immediately knelt beside the heavy access panel. The outer casing vibrated faintly under his touch. Wrong. Uneven. A cold, sharp memory surfaced instantly. The exact same stuttering sound he'd heard years ago, mid-flight, moments before the whole situation went to absolute hell. He tapped the nearest technician's shoulder. "You need to stop the pre-cycle immediately." The man frowned, annoyed. "Sir, visitors shouldn't be." "It's not recalibrating," he stated, his voice calm but imbued with undeniable authority. "Is currently locked in a partial ignition loop. If you allow it to continue, the chamber will glitch and fail catastrophically in front of everyone." The technician stared at him, stunned into silence by the sudden, quiet confidence in this stranger's voice. "How do you—" "Because this specific model utilizes a known redundant sequencing flaw if the failsafes are overridden." His hand rested on the panel access, completely steady, utterly controlled. "Give me the screen." The technician hesitated for a critical second, but another staffer, visibly sweating and desperate, violently shoved the tablet toward him. "If you know something I don't, for God's sake, now's the time." He scanned the technical interface once, instantly located the corrupted sequence, and ran a full diagnostic with practiced, fluid ease. Lines of dense data scrolled rapidly, and he followed them without a single moment of hesitation. His daughter watched silently, her eyes flickering between her father and the violently blinking warning lights. A few quick taps later, he located the bypass lockout code and entered a precise correction that mentally transported him back to the days when he performed this exact maneuver at 40,000 feet with blaring, disorienting alarms in his ears. The engine's deep hum shifted immediately, smoothing out into a stable, even pulse. The aggressive vibration softened until it became barely perceptible. The technician blinked repeatedly at the now stable readings. It stabilized. He nodded once, sharp and efficient. "Cycle it down now and restart. It will hold." The staffers exhaled in a collective rush, as if a monumental weight had been physically lifted from the entire hall. A few even looked at him with startled, immediate respect. But before anyone could formulate a question about how he possessed this proprietary knowledge, a sharp, commanding voice barked from directly behind them. "There you are, causing trouble again." He didn't need to turn around to recognize Marissa's distinctive tone. It carried the exact kind of unwavering, brittle confidence that privilege affords to people who never, ever expect to be proven wrong. The coordinator marched toward them on high, sharp heels, a clipboard pressed rigidly to her chest, irritation violently twisting her features. "What exactly are you doing touching the exhibit equipment?" she demanded, her voice rising. The technicians exchanged uneasy, guilty glances. The tablet holder opened his mouth to explain the near catastrophe, but she viciously cut him off. "No, don't defend him. He was specifically removed from the VIP line for a reason." His daughter instinctively stepped slightly behind him again, pressing herself against his leg. The familiar, low-level sting of injustice spread across his ribs, a frustrating mix of old anger and the fierce instinct to protect. He steadied himself with a slow, controlled inhale. He kept his voice perfectly level. "Your display was seconds from suffering a catastrophic glitch during the demonstration. I fixed it." Marissa scoffed, utterly contemptuous. "A maintenance worker fixed proprietary aviation tech? Please don't insult our intelligence." The chief technician tried again, his voice trembling slightly. "Ma'am, he actually—" "Enough," she snapped, raising a dismissive hand. "The VIPs are arriving any second. The very last thing I need is some rogue guest wandering into restricted equipment zones." He held his daughter's small hand tighter, but his expression remained completely unchanged, an unreadable mask. He didn't defend himself, didn't feel the need to explain his extensive background, didn't reveal anything she was clearly not ready or willing to understand. His profound calmness unnerved her more than any protestation could have. She waved vigorously toward the nearest security guard. "Escort them back to the general hall and ensure they don't access any more staff areas." The technicians stared in silent disbelief, but he didn't fight the order. He simply guided his daughter calmly away from the now stabilized panel, allowing the guard to point them toward the central walkway without any protest whatsoever. The lack of resistance only served to irritate the coordinator further, as if she had been craving a dramatic confrontation and now didn't know how to process his quiet, controlled refusal to give her one. As they walked, His daughter glanced up at him, her brow furrowed with confusion. "Why didn't you tell her you fixed it?" He paused mid-stride, his chest tightening in that quiet, familiar, aching way. The old ache that had never fully healed since he walked away. "Because she wouldn't have listened," he said softly, looking ahead. "And sometimes, fixing the problem matters infinitely more than getting the credit." She nodded thoughtfully, even if she couldn't fully grasp the mature principle behind his words yet. But she would one day. They reached the physical center of the expo just as an overwhelming wave of excitement rolled dramatically through the hall. Cameras lifted instantly. Attendees surged forward, crowding the lanes. A security escort parted the human current, guiding the approaching commander toward the main presentation stage. He stepped smoothly aside, pulling his daughter close to ensure she wasn't swept up in the sudden, surging movement. The collective hum of voices swelled dramatically and photographers' flashes burst like staccato, white stars. Meanwhile, the very technicians he had helped stood near the demo area, watching him depart with troubled, conflicted expressions. Two whispered urgently to each other. One pointed pointedly toward the engine he had just stabilized. Whatever rigid hierarchy Marissa believed she meticulously controlled, it had just experienced a deep, irreparable fracture. Because the Central Expo wouldn't run without that engine operating flawlessly. Because the technicians now knew, with absolute certainty, exactly who had saved their public presentation. Because dignity and powerful silence always manage to plant roots where self-serving arrogance can never truly see. And because the inevitable reversal, when it finally struck, would hit harder and resonate longer for having been witnessed from its subtle, quiet beginnings. The crowd's energy surged violently as the commander methodically made his way toward the main stage, but the father didn't register any of the fanfare. He kept his daughter securely close, guiding her through the shifting tides of people until they reached a quieter, less congested spot near the outer ring of specialized exhibits. From this vantage point, he could survey the entire scene. The elevated stage, the technician still glancing anxiously in his direction, and the coordinator pacing rigidly with a tense, white-knuckle grip on her clipboard. His daughter leaned into his side, looking up at the famous figure. "Baba, is he really famous?" He nodded slightly, his eyes tracing the commander's deliberate, practiced stride. "Very." She looked thoughtful, almost shy, her adoration for the aviation world obvious. "Do you think he'll fly one of the jets today?" "Maybe," he murmured, though something heavier tugged persistently at him, a deep psychological weight he'd carried for years. He tried hard to ignore it, but the sudden, tangible presence of Commander Strickland stirred volatile memories he had worked relentlessly to bury. Memories of the night everything catastrophically changed. The deafening cockpit alarms, the impossible emergency, the impossible repair at 35,000 feet, and the pivotal moment that forced him to walk away from a career he had once lived and breathed for. He blinked the thoughts back hard as the commander reached the stage. Cameras flashed mercilessly, and the announcer's powerful voice boomed through the entire hall, briefing the eager crowd on the upcoming prototype demonstration. The stabilized engine directly behind him hummed steadily, flawlessly, entirely because of him, but no one in the general public knew it yet. While the announcer spoke, the technicians gathered near the demo booth exchanged concerned glances yet again. One whispered something intense while nervously tapping on his tablet. Another looked directly across the hall at him, caught his eye, and subtly lifted the device, as if debating whether he dared to approach the stranger. Before they could decide, Marissa swept briskly in between them, efficiently blocking their line of sight. She spoke rapidly, her agitation sharp and visible in her aggressive gestures. Even from the distance, he could accurately read the entire nonverbal conversation. Her insistence that everything was running perfectly smoothly, no need for unnecessary chatter, absolutely no reason to acknowledge the maintenance worker she had dismissed not once, but twice today. She desperately wanted total control, and that control depended entirely on keeping her carefully curated version of events intact. His daughter gently tugged his sleeve. "Are we staying here?" "For a bit," he said. "I want you to see the ignition test." Her eyes brightened immediately. "The big one, that's the one." She grinned widely, leaning forward as if trying to physically see through people's shoulders. Her simple, genuine excitement softened him, grounding him firmly in the one truth that mattered above all others. He wasn't here for recognition or vindication. He was purely here for her. But fate and crisis rarely cared about pure intentions. A sharp, subtle chime echoed faintly from the control panel beside the engine. It was subtle enough that most attendees, focused on the stage, didn't hear it, but he heard it instantly. His head snapped toward the sound, instincts instantly spiking to full alert. The technicians heard it too. Their heads whipped toward the booth in unison, one of them cursing loudly under his breath. The engine's steady hum had minutely changed, barely perceptible, but enough that his heart rate spiked. Something in the cycle had slipped severely after the initial stabilization, and if it destabilized right now, with the commander moments away from inspecting it, the entire high-stakes demonstration could fail in the most public, humiliating way possible. He stepped forward without pausing to think. Baba, his daughter, asked, immediately following him. "Stay close." He moved quickly through the clustered people, weaving expertly between groups until they reached the immediate edge of the booth. The technicians were already working frantically, two tapping desperately through screens while another checked the engine module housing. Marissa hovered rigidly behind them, pointedly ignoring the insistent warning chime as if acknowledging it would instantly shatter her carefully constructed image of control. "What in God's name is happening?" Marissa snapped. "Secondary pre-cycle is looping," one technician reported, his voice tight. "Shouldn't be. The system isn't responding to the restart command." Marissa scoffed, dismissing the severity. "Restart it." "We can't," another whispered, panic evident. "If we force it, it'll glitch again permanently." Her jaw tightened savagely. "Fix it before the commander gets here." The technicians exchanged utterly helpless glances. He cleared his throat lightly. They all turned instantly. He stepped into the narrow open space beside the panel, his daughter gripping his jacket like an anchor. "Your safety recon didn't fully hold. It's slipping again. Let me help before it escalates further." Marissa's face twisted violently with utter disbelief and rage. "Absolutely not. I told you explicitly to stay away from this equipment. You are already on very thin ice for earlier misconduct." "It will fail if you don't intervene," he said evenly, looking directly at her. "If you allow the ignition sequence to restart in this state, the chamber will dangerously overheat. That is what you should truly be worried about." One technician nodded faintly, fear overriding caution. "He's right." Marissa spun viciously on him. "You do not take instructions from a guest, especially not him." The technician swallowed hard. "Ma'am, he fixed it before, and he's the only one who recognized the bypass." Her voice sharpened into a shriek. "I will not risk my job because some uninvited maintenance worker wants attention." He didn't move. He didn't flinch. His profound, unsettling calmness once again made her even more frantic and volatile. Behind them, the announcer's voice carried across the suddenly silent hall. "And now, Commander Hale Strickland will proceed directly to the prototype ignition demonstration area." The technicians paled instantly. Marissa's breath caught audibly. He stepped closer to the panel. "Let me stabilize it before he arrives." "I said no," she hissed. "Security." But before she could properly summon anyone, the technician nearest him thrust the tablet forward, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Show me what you saw." Marissa nearly exploded in fury, but her voice was instantly drowned out by the sudden, overwhelming shift in the hall's atmosphere. People parted automatically as the commander approached, his entourage flanking him. Cameras trained on his figure. Attendees buzzed like anxious static. He watched them approach for a crucial half-second, long enough to feel the true, immense weight of what was coming next. Then he crouched quickly beside the panel, his fingers moving with impossible speed and authority. The lead technician dropped into a crouch beside him, shadowing his practiced gestures. The very moment the commander reached the edge of the booth, the engine hummed smoothly and evenly again. The demonstration tech exhaled sharply, a torrent of relief flooding his entire body. He stabilized it. Marissa froze, utter horror flickering across her face, as she finally realized she had just fanatically tried to remove the only person preventing a major disaster. And the commander, now standing mere steps away, had heard the technician's confession. He lifted his head toward them, and his eyes locked onto the quiet man who had worked silently, humbly, and invisibly until this explosive moment. The commander's gaze held steady, razor-sharp, sharp enough that half the technicians straightened their backs instinctively. The quiet man beside the open panel access didn't move an inch. He kept one hand firmly braced against the housing, ensuring the stabilization held absolutely, while his daughter clung tightly to his jacket, her small fingers curled with steady, absolute trust. The technicians parted slightly as Commander Strickland approached, his imposing entourage halting several feet behind him. The powerful hum of the prototype engine filled the sudden, narrow silence between the two men. Its rhythm was now perfectly smooth, exactly as it should have been. Marissa stepped forward quickly, pasting on a strained, fake smile. "Commander, welcome. We've been preparing this area thoroughly for your inspection. Everything is fully operational and green." The technician nearest the panel flinched visibly, as if struck. Commander Strickland did not even glance at Marissa. His attention remained fixed laser-like on the man crouched beside the panel. He spoke evenly, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "Who handled the stabilization?" Marissa answered immediately, before anyone else could draw a breath. "Our staff is fully trained to manage any minor." "Who stabilized the engine?" he repeated, his voice perceptibly firmer now, overriding her. Her eyes darted frantically between the commander and her technicians. One of them, tired, stressed, and defeated by the morning's events, finally lifted a shaky hand and pointed directly at the man she had been dismissing and belittling all morning. "He did." Strickland stepped closer, deliberately closing the distance. Marissa's composure finally, completely cracked. "Commander, he's just a maintenance." The commander cut her off mid-sentence, turning his full, undivided attention toward the quiet man who slowly rose to his feet. His daughter hugged his side, watching the momentous unfolding scene with wide, uncertain eyes. For a silent heartbeat, it felt as if the entire expo had physically tilted on a single hinge. Strickland studied the man's face intently. "I recognize you." A palpable ripple ran through the nearby crowd. People began whispering urgently, cameras inching closer, zooming in. Marissa blinked rapidly, her mind unable to process the impossible situation unfolding before her. The father didn't react outwardly, only gently rested a comforting hand on his daughter's back to reassure her. Commander Strickland's chest rose with a slow, measured inhale, the kind of breath that carried the immense weight of years of shared memory. "I never forget the people who keep my crews alive." Another, far more intense ripple of shock went through the watching crowd. Marissa stumbled back a step. What does that mean?" Before anyone could answer, a sudden, sharp loud alert chimed insistently from the secondary control screen. The assistant technician instantly jerked toward it, his face drained. "The data sync is looping again." Strickland turned instantly to the workstation, his focus absolute. "Is it safe?" The tech hesitated, looking miserable. "It might destabilize again, sir. The pre-cycle sequence wasn't resetting correctly earlier." Marissa tried one last, desperate time to regain control of the narrative. "It's minor. Our technicians will," but Strickland wasn't listening to her anymore. His eyes returned immediately to the quiet man. "Can you keep it stable?" The question landed harder than the crowd's invasive whispers. The crushing weight of legitimate authority was behind it, but so was something else, something profound: trust, recognition, a bond that didn't belong to a generic maintenance worker, but did unequivocally belong to an expert engineer who once brilliantly rewired a failing aircraft with only seconds to spare before a certain crash. He didn't boast. He didn't waver or hesitate. Yes, he crouched once more, his daughter stepping just behind him, anchoring herself to his presence. The technicians immediately shifted aside, giving him full, unhindered access as he expertly adjusted the cycle logs with practiced, surgical precision. Strickland watched the fluid movements of his hands, the speed, the absolute certainty, the lack of panic. The engine hummed evenly once more, the perfection of the sound a rebuke to the chaos. "Locked," he said softly. "Safe now." The assistant technician blew out a breath of profound relief, wiping sweat from his brow. That would have failed again without him. Marissa's face drained entirely of color, revealing a horrifying realization. That can't be right. He isn't. He doesn't have authorization to. Strickland turned sharply, his voice cutting like steel. Authorization is not the same as competence. The words landed like a physical slap, silencing her completely. He stood again, gently guiding his daughter away from the panel. As the technicians resumed their positions, the commander stepped toward him until only a foot of space separated the two men. Softly, Strickland asked, "Why, after everything, are you here working maintenance?" His daughter looked up, her small gaze searching the familiar geography of his face, trying to decipher the unspoken history passing between the men. Elias held his gaze steady, allowing the silence to speak volumes. Life had pivoted violently. Priorities, once fixed on the atmosphere, were now tethered firmly to the ground, and to her. Strickland nodded once, a brief, sharp movement. It was an understanding that transcended titles and passed between men who had both witnessed the chaotic limits of human endurance. "You saved us," he said quietly, the memory etched into his voice. "My entire crew. Do you remember?" Elias remembered. Every blinding flash of light, every screaming alarm, every impossible, gut-wrenching decision, every consequence that followed. But he simply replied, "Yes." Strickland's voice deepened, taking on the timbre of official command. "Then listen to me. You didn't simply fix a mechanical glitch today. You protected the flawless, critical integrity of this entire global demonstration. The technology, the reputation, the mission, all of it rests on that integrity. That matters more than you know." Marissa shook her head, a sharp, incredulous movement that conveyed absolute certainty. "Commander Strickland, with the deepest respect, there is a fundamental confusion here. This individual was removed from the VIP reception line not once, but twice today. He has been continuously uncooperative and disruptive." Elias finally turned his full attention to her, a devastatingly calm assessment that made her professionalism momentarily dissolve. She swallowed, the movement visible in her throat. She found her voice, trying to inject authority back into her tone. Because he was attempting to breach several clearly restricted operational zones while accompanied by a minor, and because he inserted himself aggressively into technical operations he had zero recognized authorization to touch. Strickland's jaw tightened instantly, his eyes glacial. He had every inherent right to step in, especially when your high-priced staff failed disastrously to recognize a critical, immediate safety threat. The surrounding technicians froze instantly, processing the severity of the rebuke. Marissa's polished clipboard slipped slightly from her grip, clattering softly against her thigh. Strickland turned back entirely to the man standing in the work jacket. "What is your name?" Elias hesitated for only a breath, a fleeting fraction of a second. Years of calculated anonymity, of wanting to stay invisible and escape the relentless gravity of this very public moment, pressed against him. "Elias." Strickland nodded, the name resonating with unexpected weight. "Elias." He repeated it, as if anchoring the name back into reality. "You do not belong behind the rope." The crowd around them began to murmur, the sound rising like an unexpected wave, and cameras lifted in unison. Marissa stammered, "Commander, no, the optics." "No," he said firmly, cutting through her protest. "He stays for the duration of the demonstration. He stays at my side." The geometry of the hall shifted violently. The nervous technicians snapped to attention. Attendees leaned forward, sensing the magnitude of the exchange. Marissa's authority, that brittle, carefully constructed facade, cracked completely. His daughter's small hand slipped into his, clinging tightly, her eyes shining with something she hadn't felt the entire long day, pride. And with that single, public acknowledgement from the highest-ranking figure in the hall, the victory strategy, subtle and unplanned, moved forward with devastating precision. It was the first undeniable fracture in the public facade of who he appeared to be versus the dangerous truth of who he truly was. The entire hall seemed to inhale all at once, the air itself recognizing the immediate and profound shift in power dynamics. The commander's declaration, public, unwavering, impossible to reinterpret as anything less than an act of high respect, hung in the charged space between them like a drawn curtain before a great reveal. Elias felt his daughter's fingers tighten around his own, her pride radiating through her small frame like a quiet, internal sun. Marissa stood frozen, her eyes darting frantically from the commander to Elias, then to the hungry, surrounding crowd. Her authority, once sharp, absolute, and reinforced by bureaucracy, now looked flimsy and ridiculous under the glare of attention she'd never expected or wanted to face. The clipboard she usually held like a badge of rank sagged limply at her side. Strickland stepped forward again, lowering his voice so only the immediate circle of technicians and staff could hear the urgent instruction, though the watching crowd still leaned in, hungry for meaning and scandal. Stay close, Elias. The demonstration needs someone who understands the system's deep architecture, not just the surface procedures. And I absolutely trust your judgment. Elias nodded once, the calm in his posture steady and silent. He did not seek the spotlight, not today, not ever. But he understood with perfect clarity when responsibility was calling him back into a room he'd long and carefully avoided. The official announcer resumed speaking over the loudspeakers, blissfully unaware of the tension tightening at the very heart of the Aerospace Expo. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare as Commander Hale Strickland begins the momentous ignition cycle demonstration. Technicians scrambled, checking the display panel one more time, double-checking complex readings, triple-checking the mandated sequences. But instead of waiting for cues or orders from Marissa, their heads now tilted instinctively toward Elias, as if he had always been the unspoken, authoritative lead among them. Marissa stepped toward the commander with a strange, brittle smile painted across her face. If we could reposition the critical guests, Commander. Strickland stopped her with a single, firm raised hand. I want him beside me. Prepare the area for 2 primary observers. Her expression faltered completely, and she took half a step back, the panic flaring in her eyes. Commander, he's not scheduled in the protocol. He's essential, Strickland stated, without even glancing in her direction. The technicians quickly parted, creating a visible and safe space near the stage barrier where Elias and his daughter could stand. Elias guided Lena gently toward the marked line. Her eyes were wide with genuine wonder, shifting from the massive engine housing to the polished metal of the prototype aircraft suspended overhead. Baba, are we really standing here? She whispered, awe in her voice. Yes, he murmured back. We are. She held his hand tighter, as if the magic of the moment might dissolve if she blinked too long. The commander joined them, lowering his voice again. I owe you a proper, comprehensive explanation later, he said, the urgency palpable. But right now I need you sharp. If the cycle dips or shows fault again, you'll catch it faster and cleaner than anyone here. I will, Elias replied, his focus already absolute. The technicians began the formal pre-check sequence. Streams of real-time data flowed across the control tablets. Panels lit up in cascading green acknowledgments. The engine's underlying hum deepened into an even, powerful bass note. But beneath it all, faint and subtle, Elias heard something. A vibration just slightly out of rhythm. Not dangerous. Not yet. But a whisper of instability that could grow into catastrophe if ignored. He shifted slightly, tilting his head toward the display readings. Strickland noticed the movement instantly. What is it? Just listening, Elias said softly, his eyes scanning the numbers. It's holding steady, but the sync modules might lag critically when they run the secondary cycle. Strickland nodded, his expression grim. Stay alert. The second anything goes wrong, step in without waiting for authorization. Behind them, Marissa tried desperately to regain control, pulling aside one of the younger technicians with a tight, furious whisper. We need a plan now, she hissed. I can't have him front and center if the media gets the wrong idea about procedures. Do you mean the truth? The technician said quietly, his gaze steady. She stiffened, her jaw tight. The optics are all wrong. This was not approved by my office. Maybe it should have been, he replied, before breaking away from her side. Her breath hitched, and she looked around the hall as if searching for any ally left among the staff. But the staff had seen who had saved their expensive equipment and their careers. The power shift was no longer atmospheric. It was real, visible, and deeply internal. The announcer's voice rose, cutting through the anxiety. Ignition sequence beginning in 10. The hall fell into anticipatory, breathtaking silence. Elias rested his free hand on the rail in front of him. Lena leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with awe. Strickland stood tall beside them, his expression hard and focused, but his gaze flicked to Elias in a subtle confirmation of absolute trust. The engine surged with a clean, blinding roar, lights chasing in bright arcs across the demonstration chamber. The housing glowed intensely as the ignition cycle stabilized, then began to pulse in a smooth, even rhythm. Applause rippled immediately through the hall. People raised their phones high. Cameras clicked rapidly. Technicians exchanged relieved grins. But mid-cycle, exactly where Elias knew it might slip, the vibration returned, sharper and more insistent this time. He leaned forward, instinct tightening through his body like a drawn wire. Strickland noticed immediately. Talk to me. Secondary module, Elias said, already scanning the display numbers with lightning speed. It's lagging by 0.2 of a second. If they increase the output for the ramp-up, it will destabilize instantly. Strickland turned to the lead technician, his voice a commanding whip. Hold the sequence at current stable output, now. The tech froze, his fingers hovering over the board. Demonstration protocol override, Strickland commanded, leaving no room for dissent. The tech instantly obeyed, halting the sequence at its stable cycle. The dangerous vibrations evened out again, softening until they disappeared entirely back into the normal hum. The hall didn't notice a thing. To them, the event looked flawless. Strickland exhaled deeply in silent relief, then glanced toward Elias, a depth of gratitude in his eyes. You still have it. Elias didn't answer, but the profound silence between them said enough. Marissa, however, had watched the exchange, and the undeniable way the commander deferred his authority to the man in the maintenance jacket. Her expression flattened into a brittle, terrifying smile, desperately hiding her panic. The story she'd constructed today, the strict hierarchy she believed was absolutely airtight, was now falling apart in the most public way possible. The demonstration ended with applause that shook the room and echoed off the high ceiling. Strickland stepped toward the microphone to give his official remarks, but before he spoke, he turned deliberately toward Elias and gave a nod that looked almost ceremonial. And somewhere behind the useless velvet rope, Marissa finally realized the devastating truth. This was not a maintenance worker intruding clumsily on her meticulously planned event. This was the one man she should never have pushed out of the VIP line, and the entire world was about to learn exactly why. The applause still echoed through the immense hall when the commander stepped away from the mic, but he didn't leave the stage. Instead, he turned back toward Elias with an expression that made half the audience lean forward, sensing a monumental moment they couldn't yet define. His daughter stood beside him, fingers curled around the stage rail, her eyes bright from witnessing something she didn't fully comprehend, but could feel in her bones. Technicians moved to secure the equipment, but even they kept glancing toward Elias as if he were the new, absolute gravity point of the entire demonstration. Marissa lingered behind the VIP rail, her posture rigid and her expression stretched tightly, a woman watching her professional authority crumble grain by grain, visibility to the entire hall. Strickland approached Elias again, his demeanor now private and urgent. "Walk with me," he said quietly. Elias nodded and guided his daughter as they followed the commander along the narrow pathway, hidden behind the main stage. Cameras trailed them from a distance, capturing the movement but not close enough to hear their words. Attendees whispered furiously, some already speculating about his identity, others pointing toward Elias with growing, insistent curiosity. They stopped beside a tall, somber display featuring framed photos of historic aircraft and mission plaques. One was a faded shot of Strickland's own crew, young and grim, standing beside the model they'd flown during the highly classified incident years ago. Strickland gestured toward the image, his voice dropping low, heavy with memory. "You remember that day, don't you?" Elias kept his gaze steady on the photo. Every second, Strickland exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening with a quiet, profound gravity. "I've told that story 24 times in briefings and never once mentioned your name. Not because I didn't want to, but because they told me not to. Classified, they said. Too many layers. Too many uncomfortable questions it would raise about chain of command." "I know," Elias replied. His daughter watched their exchange, sensing the potent, concealed emotion beneath their quiet words, even if she couldn't decode the history yet. Strickland continued, his voice rougher. "I didn't expect to see you here. Not like this. Not hidden." Elias didn't respond with words. Instead, he rested a hand lightly and possessively on his daughter's shoulder. Life changed. The commander nodded with deep understanding. "You lost a lot that year." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The entire weight of his sacrifice and retreat was contained within that silence. Before their conversation could deepen, a sudden, piercing burst of static crackled across the hall speakers, cutting the contemplative mood instantly. Technicians turned sharply toward the demonstration booth. The control panel that had been stable moments ago flashed a violent warning. An unexpected spike in one of the auxiliary modules. The lead technician's voice rose, laced with panic. "It's the automated diagnostic cycle. It's booting too early." Strickland straightened, his command instincts resurfacing immediately. "Is it dangerous?" "Not yet," the technician replied, scrambling frantically toward the panel. "But it could force a hard, catastrophic reset if it ramps the test sequence before the primary system cools sufficiently." Marissa's tone cut through the tension, thin and panicked. "Shut it off immediately. Override the sequence." "We can't," the tech gasped, pushing hair back from his forehead. "The system is locked into an automated countdown. If we interrupt it externally, it'll trigger a complete fail-safe shutdown in front of the entire hall." A ripple of fear and confusion went through the audience. People sensed something was profoundly wrong. Cameras turned and zoomed in on the flashing lights. The atmosphere sharpened into a thin, dangerous blade of anxiety. Strickland looked directly at Elias, his question stripped of rank or formality. "Can you stop it?" Elias didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. "Yes." He stepped forward, motioning for his daughter to stay behind him. She obeyed instantly, but stayed close enough to keep him clearly in sight. He reached the panel in seconds. Technicians cleared a path for him without question or complaint. Now the countdown on the display blinked fiercely. Error 12. Then 00:11. Elias moved with lethal speed. "The override is buried under 2 systems, he said, his fingers flying across the cold interface. "I need access to the cooling regulator. Direct link." A technician handed him a connected tablet, his hand trembling. "Here E0:09. He scanned the complex data stream in a single glance. One line was wrong. Not out of malice, just a misconfigured auto-check from an earlier setup. The kind of obscure error someone unfamiliar with the engine's deepest protocols would never catch. He opened the regulator interface and tapped through 3 deep menus. Strickland leaned forward, his focus absolute. "Talk me through it." "Auto-check is trying to trigger ignition pressure before the chamber is cool," Elias said, his voice measured despite the ticking clock. "If it spikes, the system fails, dumps power, and shuts everything down in front of the global press." Marissa's voice trembled uncontrollably. "Fix it, please, just fix it." He didn't even look at her. He found the pressure lock, but the system, true to its fail-safe design, refused the external command. "Manual override," he said, sharp and concise. "I need the direct line bypass." The lead tech handed him a second tablet with shaking hands. Elias synced them instantly. his fingers moving with the practiced, disciplined speed of someone who'd done this under far worse life-or-death conditions. *04. His daughter whispered behind him, her small voice tight with fear. "Baba, it's okay," he whispered back, his eyes fixed on the screen, a small anchor of calm in the chaos. "I'm here." He bypassed the lockout, rerouted the cooldown sequence manually, and hit execute. The display froze immediately. The aggressive hum of the engine halted. Silence. Then the screen turned a solid, reassuring green. Cycle aborted safely. Cooling normalized. The hall exhaled all at once. A roar of relieved, crashing applause rose instantly from the audience. The lead technician sagged against the console. Strickland closed his eyes briefly in deep gratitude. Elias stood up slowly, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he'd held. His daughter ran to him, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. He placed a steady hand on her back, grounding both of them. Strickland turned toward the crowd, raising his voice to carry. "Ladies and gentlemen, that crisis you just avoided, you've got him to thank." Cameras snapped and flashed. The crowd surged closer, murmuring excitedly. Marissa stared, pale, utterly speechless, realizing that every humiliation she'd forced onto him today had now transformed into the most public, undeniable vindication. Because the man she kept trying to push out of the way was the one man holding her entire professional event together. This was no longer a coincidence of maintenance. This was exposure. And the reversal of power was only just beginning. The applause still spread through the hall like a rising, unstoppable tide. But Elias didn't move into the spotlight. He kept one steady hand on his daughter's back, stabilizing her as the crowd pressed closer, whispering, recording, trying desperately to understand who he was and why the commander had deferred to him. Twice, Strickland stepped in front of him, physically shielding them from the tightening circle of onlookers. "Give them room," the commander said, his voice carrying just enough hard edge to make the security staff respond instantly. Barriers shifted. The crowd eased back. Even then, hundreds of eyes stayed fixed on Elias, analyzing the mystery of the man who saved the demo. Lena clung to his side, her breath warm against his jacket. "Baba, why is everyone looking at you?" He didn't answer immediately. His pulse hadn't fully settled from the emergency he just neutralized. He knelt down slowly, brushing her hair back gently, grounding her and grounding himself simultaneously. "Because I helped," he said softly. "And because sometimes helping is louder than staying quiet." She nodded slowly, still processing the monumental scale of the attention, but she stayed close. Strickland turned to face them both, his voice low enough that only they heard. "You didn't just help. You prevented a disaster that would have replayed across every aviation broadcast in the world for weeks." Elias rose. "I saw the fault coming. And you moved," Strickland said, his admiration clear, "faster and cleaner than any engineer I've worked with in the last decade." He didn't respond. Praise wasn't why he stepped in. It never had been. Before their conversation could deepen, Marissa approached, her expression brittle, fear mixed with a rising, desperate urgency. She looked nothing like the authoritative, composed coordinator from earlier. Her fingers tightened painfully on the clipboard as if it were the last fragment of control she possessed. "Commander Strickland," she began, forcing a thin, meaningless smile. "We should debrief privately. There are established protocols to follow, media statements to coordinate. I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstandings regarding this guest." Strickland turned, his eyes narrowing with a patience that had clearly reached its limit. "What misunderstanding?" Marissa froze, her rehearsed confidence deserting her. "Well, the assumption that he just saved your demonstration for the second time today." Strickland cut in, his voice cold. "If anyone owes an explanation for their actions, it isn't him." Her lips parted soundlessly, all excuses evaporating. One of the technicians stepped forward tentatively, someone who'd stayed quiet and discreet all morning. "Commander, there's more." Strickland motioned him on. "The earlier malfunction, the first one, the technician explained. It was caused by an improper input error during initial setup. If Elias hadn't corrected it when he did, the system would have looped into catastrophic failure the moment you activated the ignition sequence. It wasn't a minor glitch. It was a cascade waiting to happen. The technician's voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear clearly. Ripples of shock spread through the immediate circle. Strickland's unforgiving gaze shifted back toward Marissa. "And you dismissed him?" She swallowed hard, her throat visibly tight. "He wasn't authorized to access the equipment, Commander. The rules? Neither were your errors." The technician muttered under his breath, barely audible, but the sentiment was clear. A few bystanders blinked, impressed by the honesty and the sheer magnitude of the internal exposure. Elias watched quietly, his calm presence radiating through the tense ring forming around them. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak a single accusatory word. He simply stood with his daughter beside him. The contrast between his humility and Marissa's former misplaced authority was sharp enough for everyone present to see. Strickland stepped closer to him. "Walk with me again, both of you." They moved toward the far, quiet end of the hall, passing exhibits, the cameras trailing them at a respectful, professional distance. People whispered as they walked, "That's the guy who fixed the engine." "Not the staff. He looks familiar. Was he military?" Fragments of the complex truth began swirling around his name. They reached a quieter corner near the historical wing, an area displaying complex aircraft schematics, salvaged metals, and mission plaques. Strickland paused in front of a framed schematic of the same aircraft model Elias had once repaired mid-flight during the deep space incident years before. "You were the lead engineer on the emergency rewire," Strickland said, his voice thick with the memory of terror and survival. "The one that saved the hyperdrive core. Weren't you?" Elias nodded once, a lifetime in the small movement. Strickland let out a breath that carried years of gratitude and concealed respect. "I never forgot that night. My crew never forgot. The world doesn't know your name because it was buried immediately under layers of classification and NDAs. But I know." Lena looked between them, confusion mixing with burgeoning awe. "Baba, you fixed a whole plane?" He crouched down to her level, holding her gaze. "I fixed something that needed fixing, Lena." Her eyes grew wide as she processed the connection. Like today, he said gently. She smiled, proud and overwhelmed all at once. Strickland placed a heavy, significant hand on Elias's shoulder. "You saved lives, Elias, critical lives. And what you did today proves you haven't lost a single step." Elias looked down, tension flickering briefly in his jaw. "I left that world behind, Commander." "Maybe," Strickland said softly, "but today the world needed you back, and you answered the call." Before Elias could reply or refute him, a sharp voice cut through the quiet corner. "Commander, sir, there's a massive problem." One of the junior technicians jogged toward them, his face pale and slick with sweat, a tablet trembling in his grip. Strickland straightened immediately. "Report." The tech swallowed hard. "The auxiliary system that triggered the countdown, we just checked the logs. It registered an unauthorized override attempt earlier this morning. Someone tried to intentionally disable the primary safety checks. It wasn't an accident." Strickland's expression hardened instantly into cold steel. Marissa, who had followed nervously at a distance, froze as if struck by a physical blow. Elias exchanged a sharp, knowing look with the commander. "Who accessed the system?" Strickland demanded. The technician hesitated before quietly responding. "The override command came from a coordinator-level login access." Marissa's breath hitched audibly, a desperate, choking sound. Lena stepped closer to her father, sensing the tension rise again, sharper than before. Strickland's eyes cooled, dangerous and focused. "Show me." The technician handed over the tablet. Elias watched the data stream flow past Strickland's eyes, immediately recognizing the timestamp, the specific sequence, the deliberate bypass. He didn't accuse. He didn't need to. The digital evidence spoke the unassailable truth for itself. Strickland turned slowly to Marissa. "You tried to hide the malfunction you caused." She shook her head frantically, denial pouring out. No, Commander. I didn't mean to. It was a minor loop. I thought resetting it would. You almost caused a public, catastrophic failure, Strickland said, his voice low but devastating. And then you tried to remove the one person capable of preventing it. Her voice cracked completely. I didn't know who he was. He had no uniform, no clearance. That's exactly the problem, Strickland said, his gaze drilling into her. Elias didn't move. He didn't intervene. His silence made the truth infinitely louder than any shouting match could. The technicians watched. Staff watched. Attendees nearby watched. This wasn't professional humiliation. This was hard, unavoidable accountability. A turning of the tide toward the painful truth. And the victory strategy advanced with quiet, devastating precision. Public exposure was no longer coming. It was already here, undeniable and final. The air inside the expo hall shifted again. No longer tense, but charged with the energy of revelation. Marissa stood frozen as the commander reviewed the tablet, her face drained of all color, while the watching attendees whispered with growing clarity. Elias remained still beside his daughter, one steadying hand resting firmly on her shoulder. He didn't need to step toward the conflict. The conflict had come irreversibly to him. Strickland lowered the tablet slowly, fixing Marissa with a gaze of complete professional disappointment. You tried to override a safety sequence you didn't understand, he said, the control in his voice terrifying. Then you blamed everyone else when the system inevitably malfunctioned. Marissa swallowed hard, struggling for any shred of justification. Commander, I misjudged the situation. I thought it would simplify the demonstration process. I never meant to cause damage. You hid your error, Strickland stated, voice sharp but perfectly controlled. And you actively punished the person who prevented that error from escalating into a global disaster. Her eyes flicked desperately toward Elias. I didn't know he had expertise. He was wearing a maintenance jacket. How was I supposed to assume he was one of us? You weren't supposed to assume anything, Strickland interrupted, his patience finally snapping. You were supposed to follow protocol, recognize expertise, and respect the staff you coordinate. A ring of spectators had now formed, not hostile, but attentive in a way that revealed just how publicly and completely the truth was unveiling itself. A young technician, finding courage in the collective solidarity forming around Elias, finally stepped forward. Her voice, though still quiet, carried the weight of public accusation. She removed him from the VIP access line, the tech stated, directing her words toward Strickland. Twice. Neither time did she consult the protocol manual. Both times he was fully entitled to be there. Another colleague chimed in, the anger barely contained. And when the engine was spiraling into failure, she actively tried to prevent him from approaching the panel to help. Marissa visibly flinched, absorbing each word like a physical blow. Strickland's face was a mask of unyielding judgment. You allowed personal prejudice to completely supersede your fundamental professional duty, he stated, the finality crushing. Marissa attempted one last, desperate appeal, her voice reduced to a fearful tremor. Commander, please. I can fully rectify this situation. I will generate any reports you require, immediately. Just grant me the opportunity to mend this. But Strickland had already cut her off, his attention irrevocably turning away from her implosion. He bypassed Marissa entirely, pivoting toward Elias. Come with me, he instructed simply. Elias responded instantly, showing no hesitation. He tightened his grip on Lena's small hand, anchoring her as they followed the commander. They moved down a hushed side corridor, its walls decorated with framed portraits of aerospace legends and historical missions. A silent hall of fame. The area offered separation from the dense crowd but was intentionally not hidden. The gathering technicians and curious attendees lingered at a respectful, almost reverent distance, watching the progression. They arrived at a minimalist, glass-walled conference alcove, a space obviously reserved for the most sensitive, high-level VIP discussions. Strickland stopped there, turning to face Elias completely. You didn't seek acknowledgement, Strickland stated, his tone carrying immense gravity. You asked for nothing. Yet, every person in this hall witnessed precisely what transpired today. Elias maintained a grounded, steady demeanor. It was never about visibility or recognition, he responded simply. I understand, Strickland confirmed. And that is exactly why your actions resonated so profoundly with everyone present. Lena pressed her head against her father's strong arm, her earlier visible anxiety having evaporated, replaced now by a quiet, deep-seated pride. The commander looked down at the girl, his normally rigid expression softening momentarily. You have a truly remarkable father, he told her gently. She nodded, her small voice unwavering. He always helps people. Strickland offered a faint, fleeting smile before redirecting his full attention to Elias. You saved my entire crew years ago in a crisis. Today, you salvaged this demonstration from utter failure. But the defining point, what matters most, is that you acted purely out of necessity, never once demanding validation or forcing anyone to recognize the depth of your ability. Sometimes, retreating into the background is the path of least resistance, Elias offered, reflecting on his quiet life. And often, the path that exacts the highest ultimate price, Strickland countered immediately. Before Elias could formulate a response, the sound of tentative footsteps halted behind them. Marissa had followed. But this time, she carried none of her earlier aggressive posturing, none of the borrowed authority, and none of the rigid, professional confidence she usually wore like impenetrable armor. Her clipboard dangled awkwardly, utterly useless, at her side. Commander, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please, I made significant errors in judgment. I fully recognize the magnitude of that now. I am simply requesting an opportunity to mitigate and correct those mistakes. Strickland merely observed her, his gaze utterly unreadable, betraying neither anger nor mercy. What specific consequences do you genuinely believe are rectifiable now? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words failed her, and she closed it again, visibly struggling to construct any semblance of an acceptable answer. I can submit a formal, written apology. I can clarify the misunderstanding with the event staff. I can. It was not a misunderstanding, Strickland interrupted flatly. It was a discernible pattern of behavior. Marissa's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. I was operating under immense pressure, she choked out, her voice reduced to a terrified whisper. I didn't know his identity. You assumed that social status defined capability, Strickland finished for her, his voice cutting and precise. But today delivered undeniable proof of the exact opposite. Marissa's eyes shone fiercely, brimming with profound humiliation. There was nowhere left to hide. Defeated, she turned her attention entirely toward Elias. I should never have treated you the way I did this morning, she admitted, her voice hollow. I should have heeded your warnings. I am truly sorry. Elias did not indulge in the opportunity for revenge. He didn't gloat, nor did he find satisfaction in witnessing her collapse. He simply offered a brief, neutral nod, showing zero signs of animosity or hostility. Just extend basic fairness to every individual, he advised, his tone conversational. That is the absolute minimum courtesy everyone deserves. His profound calmness, his lack of malice, struck her with far greater force than any outburst of anger ever could have. Strickland observed the brief, tense exchange between them with intense focus, then immediately turned to the technician who had arrived earlier bearing the digital logs. I require a full forensic review of the system log, he commanded. If her manual override action or obstruction in any way compromised the operational safety of the demonstration or the physical safety of the visitors present, I want that fully documented. Yes, sir, the technician confirmed promptly. Marissa's chin began to tremble uncontrollably. She instinctively retreated a step, the stark realization hitting her that the professional consequences of her actions were now irrevocably set in motion. Lena instinctively nestled closer to her father's side once more. Baba, she asked softly. Is that woman going to be in serious trouble? Elias immediately crouched down to her eye level, gently stroking her cheek with his thumb. When we make any significant choice, we must be prepared to accept the resulting outcomes, he explained. She made choices today that could have led to real harm for many people. But you didn't get upset or angry about it, Lena noted, her eyes searching his. He smiled, a gentle, understanding expression. Becoming angry won't ever repair the damage that has already been done, he told her. But acting correctly, that will. She absorbed this profound lesson quietly, leaning forward to press her forehead against the comforting solidity of his shoulder. Strickland watched the tender, private exchange with a measure of profound respect. You lead by the purest of examples, Elias, he acknowledged. Elias rose slowly. She is watching every move I make, he said, indicating Lena. I have no choice but to ensure I handle this correctly. Strickland nodded, genuinely moved by the depth of his dedication. Then allow me to tell you the next steps we will take. Elias slightly inclined his head, waiting. I won't merely acknowledge your critical work publicly, Strickland stated. I am officially assigning a formal commendation for your intervention today, ensuring it is permanently documented. Furthermore, when circumstances permit, I want you to reconnect with my flight crew. They have desired that reunion for a very long time. Elias took a slow, measured breath, considering the weight of the request. I will certainly give that serious thought, he replied. Strickland accepted the cautious answer with a small, understanding nod. For now, he said, that is sufficient. Strickland then turned back toward the chaotic energy of the main exhibition hall, using a subtle hand signal to instruct security personnel to guide him through a less traveled side exit, avoiding the inevitable press of the curious audience. But before he departed, he paused, looking back directly at Elias. When the individual of true importance walked into this hall today, he stated clearly, every single person here assumed it was me. They were mistaken. Elias remained silent, absorbing the weight of the declaration. Strickland held his gaze steadily. The person truly worthy of respect, the one worth bowing to, was the man standing quietly in the corner, simply holding his daughter's hand. With that powerful declaration, Strickland walked away, leaving behind a truth that resonated, loud, undeniable, and echoing through the very foundations of the facility. Elias remained exactly where he was, the calm, unassuming epicenter of a storm that had finally, dramatically shifted entirely in his favor. For several prolonged moments after the commander's departure, the glass-walled conference alcove felt suspended in a state of stunned, profound silence. Attendees who were nearby leaned in, exchanging hushed whispers, their expressions a mixture of intense curiosity and genuine awe. The lingering technicians maintained their respectful distance, their gazes fixed on Elias. Most notably, the uniformed security team subtly adjusted their stance and positions, instinctively forming a protective, unobtrusive ring around the space, not to guard the recently departed commander, but to shield Elias. Lena looked out at the murmuring crowd, then quickly pressed herself closer into her father's side. Baba, can we go home now? She asked. Soon, sweet one, he promised gently, but not quite yet. She simply nodded, accepting his reassurance without needing elaboration. That deep, unshakable trust was a physical certainty he felt resonate through his entire being every time her small hand sought his. Behind them, Marissa still stood frozen, pale and completely uncertain, utterly stripped of the rigid self-assurance she had possessed that morning. She seemed trapped between dreading Strickland's final, unseen judgment and the devastating realization that every single staff member in the hall now understood the vital information she had deliberately dismissed. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was brittle and strained. Is he leaving permanently? She murmured. Elias offered no reply. She wasn't truly asking him anyway. One of the nearby technicians, far less intimidated than he had been an hour ago, approached Marissa directly. Your credentials were used to initiate the system override, he informed her clinically. You are required to report this incident immediately to oversight and compliance. Her shoulders slumped heavily. I know, she whispered. The technician let out a heavy sigh, but his tone lacked any malice. You simply should have allowed him to assist from the very beginning. Marissa closed her eyes tightly, finally absorbing the undeniable, painful truth she had aggressively rejected all morning long. Elias deliberately shifted his attention away from Marissa. His core instinct was never to linger in the spotlight. He desperately wanted to guide his daughter out, away from the intense scrutiny, the sudden clamor, and the oppressive recognition he had spent years avoiding. But something held him fast, an internal tug he seldom permitted himself to acknowledge. Responsibility. Strickland's potent words resonated in his consciousness. You answered. Lena gently pulled at his sleeve. Baba, how does the commander know you? She asked, bewildered. He crouched instantly to her height, deciding on partial honesty. A very long time ago, I managed to repair something extremely volatile and dangerous, he explained. My work helped ensure that he and his team returned home safely. Like the engine today? She queried, making the connection. Very much like the engine, he confirmed softly. Her eyes widened, a realization dawning that was beautifully simple and utterly complete. So you helped him even before today? He nodded slowly. She beamed up at him, her smile small, intensely proud, and far more powerful than she realized. I think he is your friend. Elias felt a sudden tightness in his chest, a rare surge of powerful emotion in areas he habitually kept strictly guarded. Perhaps in certain ways, he conceded. Perhaps he is. Before he could straighten up, a small cluster of journalists and media personnel cautiously approached the alcove. They were not aggressive, merely drawn by the gravitational pull of the commander's dramatic earlier statements. One reporter raised a hand in polite appeal. Sir, might we request a brief moment of your time? The commander specifically mentioned you averted a critical system failure today. The public is eager to understand what occurred. Elias stood, straightening his posture, but remained rooted in place. He offered a single, resolute shake of his head. I will not be offering any public statements, he stated calmly. I am simply here today with my daughter. That is the complete extent of my presence. The journalist paused, momentarily thrown. Elias's refusal was devoid of anger or hostility. It was merely firm, precise, and utterly unyielding, the kind of boundary that offered zero room for debate or negotiation. The media team respectfully retreated. Lena tugged insistently at his hand again, her voice hushed. Baba, do we truly need to remain here? No, he replied gently, running his thumb lightly across her cheek. We are departing very soon. He was preparing to walk away when another technician approached, this one younger, visibly earnest, and still shaken by the near disaster. Sir, the technician said quickly, I just needed to personally thank you. If that system had detonated, multiple people could have been seriously injured. You were correct about everything. Elias offered him a straightforward nod of validation. You also performed the vital work, he pointed out. You listened. The profound rarity of that simple act, listening, was often the most overlooked quality. Marissa approached then, maintaining a respectful distance of several feet. Her voice was small but carried the heavy ring of sincerity. I fully realize that I cannot reverse the damage I caused today, but I am profoundly sorry, and you genuinely deserved far better treatment than what I afforded you. Elias did not extend explicit forgiveness, nor did he offer condemnation. He didn't need to define her fate. Extend better treatment to the next person you encounter, he advised. That, truly, is the only apology that holds weight. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she nodded in acceptance. A third technician approached, his curiosity laced with hesitant respect. Sir, were you affiliated with the Air Force? A few of us recognized the distinct methodology you used to manage the system override. Elias paused, his jaw tightening slightly. That specific chapter of his life was one he vehemently resisted reopening. A very long time ago, he replied guardedly. The technician offered a gesture of deep respect. It certainly shows. Lena looked up at her father, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. You used to repair large airplanes, like the ones the commander flies? He exhaled slowly, accepting the exposure. Yes, I did. She smiled again, a broad, genuine expression of delight. That is truly amazing. Her simple innocence sliced through the dense, heavy atmosphere of consequence and fame, providing a powerful reminder of why he had deliberately chosen a quieter existence, why he had stepped away from that intense career, and why he carried the immense internal weight he did, handling it all with calm composure, solely for her. Nonetheless, as Elias surveyed the main hall, watching the staff observing him discreetly, hearing attendees murmur his name, seeing technicians now subtly orienting themselves toward his presence, he was forced to accept an undeniable reality. Silence had failed to hide him permanently. Today's near-catastrophe had brutally forced his carefully guarded truth into the open air. Now people truly saw him. The strategy of allowing arrogance to self-destruct had reached its halfway point. The truth had begun its public rollout. But the definitive, final moment, the one that would conclusively cement the entire scenario, remained pending. He guided his daughter toward the large exit doors. Let's get some fresh air, he suggested. She nodded eagerly, falling into step beside him, their fingers tightly intertwined. But as they moved toward the main corridor, the ambient sound shifted. The whispers that followed them were not derisive or dismissive, but respectful, reverent, and fiercely curious. A single voice cut clearly through the din. Is that really him? The one the commander virtually bowed to? Elias maintained his stoic exterior, walking with the inherent, quiet dignity that had always defined him. But internally, he felt the seismic shift, the irreversible turning of a long-overdue tide. This was not the conclusion of the reversal. It was the intense, silent moment just before everything in his life changed forever. Elias continued walking toward the main exit corridor, his daughter's hand secured in his. But the exhibition hall now actively resisted his disappearance. Everywhere he moved, gazes tracked him. Some eyes were wide with sudden, awestruck admiration. Others were filled with confusion, and a few carried the heavy realization of their own earlier misjudgment of the quiet man who had tried to occupy the hall's inconspicuous corners that morning. The waves of murmurs swelled. That's him, the engineer. The commander knows his history. He salvaged the entire demonstration. Elias held his gaze steady, his posture calm, driven more by practical instinct than by any sense of personal pride. Lena remained glued to his side, absorbing the intensity with the quiet solemnity of a child realizing the boundaries of her known world had just dramatically expanded. Just as they reached the enormous exit doors, two professional security officers deliberately stepped into their path. Not to obstruct, but to formally request. Sir, one officer stated politely, Commander Strickland specifically requested your presence in the VIP briefing lounge. He stressed that the matter is urgent and critical. Elias paused, his guard immediately raised. Is there some sort of operational issue? No issue whatsoever, the officer assured him. He simply requires you to be present for the next steps. Lena looked up, her expression questioning. Baba, should we go? He gently stroked her hair. We will check on what he needs, and then we will head straight home. They turned and followed the officers down a quieter side hallway, flanked by meticulously polished display cases and historical framed photographs. The door to the briefing lounge slid open silently, revealing a focused, high-level gathering inside. Present were Strickland, several of the Expo's most senior engineers, a handful of high-ranking aviation authority officials, and one individual Elias had absolutely not anticipated seeing. An older man, distinguished, wearing a highly decorated Air Force lapel pin. A man who had once been his commanding officer, overseeing highly sensitive, classified operations Elias had been directly involved in. The man turned sharply at the sound of the door and froze in shock. Roar, he breathed. Elias let out a slow, controlled exhale. Colonel. The colonel moved forward, his seasoned face registering pure disbelief. I received reports that this demonstration nearly imploded and that somehow, you intervened. He studied Elias closely. I truly thought you had vanished into the ether for good. I certainly tried to, Elias replied quietly. Lena tightened her grip on his hand, and the colonel's stern expression softened perceptibly. Strickland stepped forward, assuming control of the room. I requested Elias's presence here because every individual in this room must hear the unvarnished truth, and he deserves that truth to be spoken publicly, without reservation. Elias remained perfectly still, neither moving nor displaying any outward sign of anxiety, yet he felt the palpable shift in the atmosphere, the immense emotional weight of the impending disclosure settling around him. The senior engineer who had been consulting with the colonel cleared his throat. The finalized system logs confirm his intervention, he reported gravely. He prevented a compound double system failure. Crucially, none of our current on-site staff had correctly identified the concurrent fault lines. Strickland folded his arms across his chest, his gaze demanding attention. Which leads us directly to the core question, he stated. Why is a man of this caliber no longer operating within this industry? The colonel instinctively glanced toward Elias, seeking silent permission to proceed with the sensitive history. Elias gave him a minimal nod of consent. He deliberately walked away. The colonel began, his voice lowered. Following a devastating accident involving his wife, he paused, allowing the gravity of the statement to sink in. The official investigation fully exonerated him of any fault, but he internalized the responsibility too deeply. The colonel continued. He resigned his commission from the Air Force, systematically vanished from every active roster, and rejected every professional offer for consultation or return we sent him. Lena looked up at her father, her eyes wide with shock and a quiet, heartbreaking realization. Baba, is that the reason you stopped repairing important things? His voice was low, burdened. I desperately needed to dedicate myself fully to you, he whispered. And I simply could not continue in that line of work. Not after everything that happened. She leaned heavily against him, her silence conveying a depth of sudden, mature understanding. Strickland took another step closer, emphasizing the importance of his words. Your actions years ago preserved countless lives, more than you are aware of. And your decisive action today averted a public catastrophe right here, witnessed by hundreds. You never lost your technical skill. You didn't lose your fundamental self. You simply chose to step into the shadows. Elias allowed the powerful assertions to hang in the air, offering no counter-response. He was not present to receive accolades, nor had he ever been. One of the senior engineers in the room addressed Elias directly, his tone professional and urgent. Our organization desperately needs expertise like yours, even in a part-time or advisory capacity. Your unique insight into system fault lines is irreplaceable and cannot be replicated by our current staff. Elias gently shook his head, definitive in his refusal. I am not returning to that world, he stated. I have entirely different priorities that guide me now. The colonel nodded, almost proudly acknowledging Elias's autonomy. And that is absolutely your prerogative. Strickland's gaze swept between Elias and the colonel. Then I must be the one to state what needs to be said publicly right now. Elias stiffened instantly, resisting. No, Strickland countered, but his tone was unexpectedly gentle. You do not have a choice in this matter, not this time. Not for the sake of your status, but because complete transparency is the only way this institution can rebuild trust after the mistakes made today. The colonel added quietly, there is massive speculation mounting outside. The narrative that is told must be the accurate one. Elias offered no further resistance. He simply placed his hand firmly on his daughter's shoulder. She remains my sole priority, he affirmed. Nothing else matters. Strickland offered a faint, respectful smile. She is the most unambiguous priority I have ever witnessed a man carry. Lena instinctively leaned further into her father's warmth, and he wrapped his arm tightly around her, grounding his emotional core in the single, compelling reason he had kept his devastating past silent for so long. Just then, the door slid open abruptly and a breathless technician hurried into the room. "Commander, the media contingency is rapidly consolidating in the main hall. They are demanding immediate clarification and specifically asking about the man who definitively saved the demonstration." Strickland nodded sharply once. "Then we shall provide them with clarity." The colonel placed a steady, reassuring hand on Elias's arm. "You are not required to deliver speeches. Simply stand next to him. Allow the world to see the reality." Elias paused, hesitating not out of personal cowardice, but from the crushing weight of old, familiar ghosts. Then, Lena reached out and took his hand again, whispering, "Baba, it will be all right." Her small voice was the ultimate, settling force, instantly resolving every internal conflict. He stood tall. Strickland addressed the high-ranking officials. "Escort us immediately to the main platform." The security officers nodded, opening the doors wide. As the group began its measured walk back toward the vast main hall, Elias moved with quiet purpose alongside the commander, his daughter holding his hand with fierce, unshakable trust. The crowd's murmurs amplified into a loud, curious buzz as they neared. "Is that really him? The engineer? He's walking with the commander now. Are they finally going to explain the failure?" The tide of focused attention swelled, and Elias finally grasped a profound truth. This necessary public exposure was not the destruction of his quiet dignity. It was the culminating, overdue final act of honesty. The powerful platform lights were already humming and warming the stage as Elias stepped back into the main hall, standing immediately beside the commander. The entire crowd shifted seamlessly, moving like a single organism, directing its attention toward the quiet, powerful gravity Elias exerted. A force they had utterly failed to recognize until this precise moment. Cameras rose into position. Reporters jostled forward, eager for the story. Technicians throughout the hall straightened their posture. Even the on-site security personnel relaxed their rigid stance slightly, intuiting the tremendous significance of the impending announcement. Lena held his hand firmly, her small grip steady, her eyes darting cautiously between the sea of watching faces and her father's serene, composed profile. She did not recoil this time. Instead, she stood marginally taller. Strickland approached the central podium. He possessed a natural authority that did not require amplification to control a space, yet he used the microphone, granting the audience the expected formality. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the vast hall. "There is a matter of critical importance that must be addressed before this scheduled event can continue." The hundreds of murmurs quieted instantly, achieving total silence. Elias remained deliberately a few steps behind the podium, his daughter pressed tightly against his side. He continued to despise the harsh spotlight. He simply wished for truth, to finally replace the damaging assumptions that had dominated the atmosphere of the entire morning. Strickland pointed emphatically toward the magnificent, restored engine display. "You all witnessed what appeared to be a flawless performance today. What you were not permitted to see was the terrifying proximity of total failure. Not just once, but during two critical, distinct phases. A visible ripple of shock moved through the hushed hall. Someone," Strickland continued, his voice dropping slightly for emphasis, "recognized the fundamental danger before it became an irreversible crisis. Someone who possessed the requisite skill and decades of experience to repair complex systems under extreme pressure. And someone who acted purely out of professional imperative, despite being repeatedly and aggressively told that he had no legitimate place here." A deep, absolute silence fell over the entire venue. Strickland stepped dramatically to the side of the podium, angling his entire body directly toward Elias. "This," he announced, projecting his voice with final authority, "is the man who saved this aerospace demonstration today." The sound of dozens of camera shutters firing was sharp and instantaneous, like sudden rainfall. The entire crowd leaned forward raptly. Some gasped, finally connecting the quiet father with the man they'd seen briefly arguing with staff. Others simply stared, struggling to reconcile the unassuming visitor they'd relegated to the background with the figure now placed squarely at the heart of the event. Strickland continued, allowing no interruption. You encountered him merely as an attendee, he projected. Perhaps as a general maintenance worker, or simply another anonymous face in the gathering. But years ago, when my entire flight crew was crippled by a catastrophic avionics failure at 40,000 feet, this man meticulously rewired the core operational system by hand, mid-flight, and kept us all alive just long enough to execute an emergency landing. His identity was never disclosed because the mission was classified. Today, he averted another disaster right here, and this time we will not conceal the truth. The vast hall erupted into a wave of shocked, intense murmuring. Technicians exchanged wide-eyed, knowing glances. Attendees whispered his name, Elias Rohr, testing the sound of it for the first time. Elias neither flinched nor raised his chin in acknowledgement. He simply stood there, his daughter securely anchored at his side, accepting the unavoidable truth without allowing himself to bask in the sudden glory. Strickland delivered the final definition. This man is Elias Rohr, a former Air Force avionics engineer, heavily decorated but previously uncredited for classified service, and he is undeniably the reason many of us are even alive and standing here today. A spontaneous wave of applause began, tentative at first, then rapidly building into a strong, full, deeply heartfelt human ovation. Lena squeezed his hand tightly. Baba, everyone is clapping just for you, she exclaimed. His throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I know, sweetheart, he murmured, and you aren't afraid at all. He managed a gentle smile. Not when you are right here with me. Marissa stood motionless near the edge of the platform, utterly pale and statuesque. The technicians standing near her subtly distanced themselves, as if the local laws of gravity had suddenly redefined which individuals truly commanded weight in the room. Strickland raised a decisive hand, immediately calming the applause. However, there is a second truth that must be acknowledged, and it is not a comfortable one. The hall fell into absolute stillness. Earlier today, Strickland continued, Elias Rohr was forcibly removed from the VIP access line on 2 separate occasions. This was not because he posed a threat, nor because he lacked proper authorization, but because a staff member made a unilateral assumption about his value based entirely on his superficial appearance, rather than his intrinsic character or capability. The silence in the hall deepened, taking on a sharper, accusatory edge. Strickland did not utter her name. He did not need to. This entire event is fundamentally dedicated to honoring the individuals who advance and elevate the field of aviation, he declared. Yet today, the singular person who elevated all of us was almost permanently expelled from the premises. Every eye subtly but undeniably shifted toward Marissa. Lena looked up at her father, whispering, Baba? Was she the mean lady? He gently stroked her knuckles. She simply made mistakes, my dear. That is all. Strickland stepped away from the podium and addressed Elias directly. You did not hesitate for a second. You never sought a claim. You simply protected every person present in this hall. Elias finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying perfectly through the sudden void. Anyone would have intervened. No, not anyone, Strickland corrected him firmly. Only someone who understood the true, crushing cost of catastrophic failure. Elias glanced toward the repaired engine, vividly recalling the screaming alarms, the smoke, and the impossible choices he had made years earlier high above the clouds. You recognized the danger signs because you have lived through them and you acted decisively, Strickland concluded. That is the critical difference. Reporters immediately raised their hands, but Strickland held up his palm, preempting all questions. Elias owes no interviews to anyone. No further statements. No. The facile explanations were inadequate. The stark, necessary truth, however, demanded a vast, open space in which to finally settle. Elias pivoted slowly, facing the vast sea of faces once more. If you retain just one insight from the disarray of today, he projected, his voice now steady and resonant, let it be this singular lesson. Heroes rarely occupy the pedestals we construct for them. Sometimes, they are found with the grease of a wrench still marking their hands, not the polished gleam of metals on their chests. Sometimes they are simply fathers, prioritizing a promise to take their daughters to a science expo. And often, they are quiet, not out of shyness, but because they have absorbed and carried the unbearable weight of a lifetime's worth of sound and fury. A silence held the hall captive for a beat, and then the applause surged back. A torrential, profound wave that was demonstrably bigger, louder, and undeniably rooted in genuine sentiment. Lena, transfixed, gazed up at her father, her small face illuminated by a pride that radiated almost visibly. "Baba," she whispered, the noise of the crowd irrelevant. "You're like a real hero." Elias immediately dropped to one knee, bringing himself level with her. The clamor of recognition faded slightly as he focused on her. "No, sweetheart," he murmured, gently brushing the hair from her forehead. "I'm just someone who saw a problem and tried my best to help fix it." Without hesitation, she launched herself into his arms, securing her grip around his neck. "That's exactly what a hero is," she declared firmly. He enveloped her in a secure embrace, the physical warmth of her small body serving as an immediate anchor, stabilizing him against the overwhelming, continuous roar of appreciation filling the massive hall. When Elias finally rose, Strickland was standing close, his usual military stiffness softened by a newfound respect. "I know the only thing you truly desire right now is to return home," the commander said. His voice dropped low so only Elias could hear over the sustained applause. "But if you are willing to spare a few more minutes, I would like you to walk with me one last time. Not as a photo opportunity for the media, but for personal, necessary closure." Elias paused, absorbing the weight of the request. It wasn't an order, but an appeal. He nodded slowly. He scooped Lena into his arms, settling her comfortably against his hip, then turned toward the sheltered walkway leading away from the blinding stage lights. He followed Strickland, threading a path through the thronging crowd which instantly melted away, granting them passage. Behind them, the collective murmurs of the audience had fundamentally shifted. It was no longer the buzzing hum of shock or mere curiosity. It was thick with respect, profound recognition, and something far heavier, the slow, arduous dawning of a truth the established world had tried to bury but could now ignore no longer. They proceeded down the narrow, stark corridor backstage, the applause receding rapidly, becoming nothing more than a faint, rhythmic echo swallowed by the sterile concrete walls. Elias adjusted Lena on his hip. Her small arms were draped securely around his shoulders, her cheek pressed trustingly against the coarse fabric of his collar. Lena was utterly silent now, not from exhaustion, but from a quiet, deeply contemplative observation. The unique state children sometimes entered when the complex machinery of the world unexpectedly clicked into place, making sudden, sharp sense. Strickland maintained his steady stride beside them, yet his posture was noticeably looser, his rigid formality dissolving. The profound, institutional burden he had carried earlier seemed perceptibly lighter, as if the difficult truth he had finally voiced had served to unburden both Elias and himself. The hallway stretching ahead was currently deserted, its length lined by solemn, framed mission plaques and aged photographs of flight crews, men and women who had routinely risked their lives traversing skies that the vast majority of people could only ever imagine in dreams. When they reached the very last plaque, a glossy image featuring a crew standing crisply in front of the exact aircraft Elias had once saved and repaired midair, Strickland came to an abrupt halt. "This is the one," Strickland stated softly, his gaze fixed on the image. The night every single thing irrevocably changed. Elias gently lowered Lena to the polished floor. Immediately, she slid her small hand into his, gripping tightly, her bright gaze slowly drifting upward to analyze the framed photograph. "Is that the exact plane you fixed, Baba?" she inquired. He gave a slow, measured nod. Strickland subtly angled his body, fully facing Elias, his voice stripped bare of rank, now genuinely gentle. "I have never understood the mechanism of how you achieved that," Strickland confessed. "How you managed to keep your hands surgically steady while every dashboard alarm was violently screaming. or how you successfully rewired that entire system at such dizzying altitude. I have worked alongside genuinely brilliant, world-class engineers, Elias, but I have never encountered anyone who could navigate and think through true chaos with your singular clarity. Elias barely glanced at the photograph. He didn't need to. The memory remained painfully sharp. The acrid smell of smoke, the deafening scream of shaking metal, the frantic sparking of malfunctioning circuits, and the crushing weight of a life-or-death decision. He literally had no time to question or second-guess. People were counting on me, he stated simply, his voice flat. That's all there was to it. Strickland inhaled deeply, the sound audible in the quiet corridor, as if performing a necessary centering ritual. For years, I have carried the need to thank you. Not in a redacted official report, not buried in some classified write-up, but as one man speaking to another. You didn't have to, Elias replied, shifting his weight. I did, Strickland countered immediately, especially after what happened today. He paused, lowering his gaze to Lena with deliberate earnestness. You know, your father saved an incredible number of people that night. Far more lives than he will ever willingly admit to. Lena's eyes widened to impossible circles. Really? Strickland nodded firmly. He kept us flying, against every known law of aerodynamics, just long enough to reach the runway. If he hadn't performed that miracle, that picture hanging right there on the wall would simply never have existed. Lena squeezed her father's hand so tightly it was almost painful, and whispered up to him, her voice choked with conviction, Baba, I'm so incredibly proud of you. Elias felt those simple, profound words settle into the deepest part of his chest, making every subsequent breath richer. Come on, he murmured, gently smoothing her hair back. We really should head home soon. But Strickland lifted a hand, a silent request for patience. Before you finally depart, he said, his tone softening but gaining a new, focused intensity. There is one more thing I feel compelled to say in complete privacy. Just the three of us. Elias straightened instantly, preparing himself. Strickland's voice dropped, carrying a palpable, quiet gravity. What transpired on that stage today wasn't merely about a piece of malfunctioning equipment. It exposed a fundamental weakness in our culture, something far deeper and more damaging. It showed how instantly people are willing to judge. It showed how easily true, profound competence is dismissed or overlooked simply because it isn't neatly wrapped up in the proper uniform or the official title. You didn't just repair the drone system today, Elias. You unintentionally exposed a systemic truth that everyone in that hall was forced to see. Elias offered no reply. He understood. The harsh reality, freshly unearthed, required absolutely no further elaboration or flowery embellishment. Strickland shifted slightly. Beyond the technical feats, you gave your daughter something truly priceless today. She witnessed you under unimaginable pressure, and she saw you remain absolutely steady. She saw the pain you have carried for years, and she saw that you refused to let that pain define your worth. Critically, she saw hundreds of people publicly recognize the immense burden you have so quietly carried alone. Elias looked down at Lena, standing firmly beside him, her eyes bright, fully trusting, beautifully unaware of the depth of the sacrifice he made for her, or how profoundly she currently served as his immovable anchor. She's why I finally left the sky, he confessed. I couldn't bear the thought of her losing anything else. She didn't lose you, Strickland emphasized, his gaze unwavering. That, Elias, is the only measure that truly matters. A profound silence settled over the three of them, heavy with shared understanding, yet simultaneously healing. Then, Strickland reached deliberately into the inside pocket of his dress jacket and carefully retrieved a small, circular engraved coin. It was a formal aviation challenge coin, worn smooth around its edges by years of being habitually carried, yet its surface was highly polished from constant friction. He gently placed the weighty metal disc into Lena's open hands. This coin belongs to him, Strickland said, indicating Elias. And now it belongs to you as well. Let it be a permanent, tangible reminder of who your father truly is. Lena traced the cool coin with tiny fingertips, her eyes wide with solemn fascination. Baba, look. Elias met her gaze, a profound, overwhelming emotion tightening the muscles in his chest until he could barely breathe. "Thank you," he managed to say quietly. Strickland nodded once, a gesture of absolute finality. "You have unequivocally earned your peace, Elias. But if you ever, for any reason, feel the desire to return, even if only for a single day or merely an hour, we will keep the door open indefinitely." "I know," Elias answered. "And one more thing," Strickland added, his tone becoming almost formal again, reclaiming his rank for the final statement. "You were never intended to stand behind a security rope, Elias. Not back then and certainly not now." With that powerful final declaration, Strickland extended his hand fully. Elias clasped it firmly. Not a formal shake, but a solid, necessary gesture of profound gratitude, long-awaited closure, and a quiet, mutual respect that, they both realized, had existed between them silently for years, long preceding the events of this tumultuous day. When they finally stepped back out of the secluded backstage area and into the main corridor, small groups of people still lingered, whispering softly in hushed tones. But the palpable energy saturating the space had completely transformed. There was no more lingering confusion, no hostile speculation. Only solidified recognition, deep respect, and genuine understanding. As they neared the main exit doors, Lena craned her neck to look up at him. "Baba, will all these people still look at you when we finally leave?" He offered her a small, gentle smile. "Maybe," he conceded, "but that doesn't fundamentally change anything about us." "Why?" "Because I am still me," he explained. "And despite everything, we are still going home together." She nodded, visibly satisfied by the certainty of that statement. "Can we get ice cream?" Elias let out a genuine, soft laugh, the first sound of unburdened happiness he had produced all day. "Yes," he agreed instantly. "Ice cream first." They stepped together through the automated glass doors, emerging into the crisp, cool reality of the late afternoon air. The ordinary world outside continued its predictable, indifferent pace, entirely unaware of the dramatic revelation and reckoning that had just concluded inside the high-tech expo hall. Truthfully, that blissful normalcy was precisely all Elias ever wanted. He had no need for crowds, no desire for cameras, only the simple, profound reassurance of the small, warm hand securely held within his own. Behind them, the massive convention center continued to buzz with activity and residual energy. But the story that was rapidly circulating through the hall had already transcended a mere scandal. It was transforming into a lasting narrative, a potent reminder that genuine dignity is not extinguished by being hidden away, that inherent human worth does not simply disappear because it goes unrecognized, and that the true VIPs, the essential people, are almost always the ones nobody pays attention to until the infrastructure of the world inevitably begins to tilt and fail. Elias inhaled deeply, the cool air flooding his lungs, settling the final lingering tremors and adrenaline of the day. He had been sidelined, dismissed, and overlooked by a system too busy focusing on titles. But today he had also been seen, truly irrevocably seen, without ever having to raise his voice, issue a demand, or prove anything beyond the simple, powerful act of doing exactly what he had always done. Protect people. Fix what is broken. Stand absolutely steady when the world around him shakes. "Baba," Lena whispered again, looking up at him with unshakable certainty. "Yes, you really are a hero." He reached down, his fingers gently stroking her hair as he kissed the top of her head. "I'm your father, sweetheart," he corrected gently. "And that is the only kind of hero I ever need to be." They continued their walk toward the distant parking lot, the setting sun dipping low, stretching their figures into long parallel shadows behind them. Shadows that, for the first time in years, finally matched the hidden, formidable truth of who Elias truly was.